The sun was already a white-hot brand overhead when I rode into Dust Haven. Heat rolled off the hard-packed ground, shimmering like water that wasn't there. And the whole place stank of sweat, horses, and gun oil. That smell always hits first. Then the sounds, men shouting over bids, cattle bawling, boots scuffing in the dust, and the occasional crack of a whip cutting through it all. I'd been here more times than I cared to count. But every visit scraped something raw in me. Maybe it was the crowds. Maybe it was the way eyes hung too long on the scars running down my jaw and disappearing into my collar. I tugged my hat lower and nudged my horse forward through the throng, trying to think of nothing but the reason I'd come, a new mount to replace Red Jack. The gelding that had gone lame last month, that was all. Get a horse. Head back to the ranch. No lingering. No stories. I dismounted near a post, looped my reins, and scanned the pens. Bay colts, a few chestnut mares, a stallion that looked like hellfire and broken promises. Men haggled in clumps, chewing tobacco, laughing hard. I was about to drift that way when something cut across the din, a voice, slick as grease and twice as foul. Step right up, folks. You won't find stock like this anywhere. Big, strong, obedient, can work sunup to sundown. I turned without thinking at first. I figured it was another line of horses, or maybe a slave driver peddling field hands. Illegal now. But out here, law rides slow. Then I saw her. She was standing on a low wooden crate, wrists tied in front of her with rough hemp rope. Face turned slightly down, but not enough to hide it. Dirt smeared her cheek, and her dress little more than a ragged shift clung to her shoulders. But her eyes. Lord help me. They were brown but bright, alive in a way that punched the breath right out of me. Not begging. Not broken. Watching the man behind her, tall, sharp-featured, with a crooked grin that made my teeth itch, held a long leather strap like a leash. Silas Grant. I'd heard of him. Traded stolen cattle, sometimes worse. He looked right at me and smiled thin. Deaf and dumb, he called over the noise. But strong as a mule and docile as a lamb. Can cook, clean, mind the stock. Ain't no trouble, 'cause she can't hear you yell or talk back. The crowd chuckled. Coins clinked. Someone muttered something low and ugly. I felt my stomach twist. My first instinct was to turn away. Keep walking. Not my fight. Not my problem. Lord knows I'd seen enough of other people's trouble to know better. But then she looked at me, just a flicker. Eyes up, cutting through heat and haze like a hawk's. And for half a heartbeat, the noise of the market dropped clean away. I saw fear in her, sure, but also something else. Strength. A warning, almost like she was daring me to do something. Anything, or at least not look away. Damn it, I turned back to my horse. Cursing under my breath. This wasn't why I came. I'd spent years scraping together enough to keep my ranch alive. I needed a horse. Not a stranger with rope-burned wrists and a man like Silas attached to her past. But I didn't move. $50. Someone hollered. Silas smirked, nodding slow. 50? Who's got 55? Before my head caught up, my hand was in the air. I do. Silas's grin sharpened. Well, now 60. Silence. He looked around, waiting for more, but no one bit. Either too expensive, or too much bad luck standing up there on that crate. Sold, he barked, quick and pleased, and that was that. I hated myself the second the word left him. $55, my whole horse fund, my winter fund too, if I was honest. But it was done. Silas shoved her forward, cut the rope with his knife, and dropped it in the dirt. She stumbled, caught herself, and straightened with quiet grace. He handed me a scrap of paper, some laughable proof of sale, and winked. Careful, cowboy. She don't hear a thing, but folks say she got the devil's luck. I didn't answer. Just took her arm gentle and steered her clear of the crowd. She flinched but didn't pull away. We reached my horse. She glanced up at him, then at me, then touched the worn leather reins like she was introducing herself. Something in the way she moved, deliberate but soft, told me she understood more than Silas claimed. You ride? I asked nothing, just a small tilt of her head. Then she tapped 2 fingers to her own chest, made a motion like gripping reins. I almost smiled. Almost. I helped her up onto the wagon bench, then climbed beside her. The sun was sliding west, throwing long gold stripes across the plain. We didn't speak, not that we could, as we rolled out of Dust Haven and onto the road that would take us back to Dust Creek Ranch. Ours stretched long. She sat straight but easy, scanning horizon and earth like she was measuring them. I wanted to ask her name, but didn't know if she'd answer. My throat felt too dry for small talk anyway, so I just kept the reins loose and listened to the wheels groan over the dirt. Then the wind shifted. 1 minute still. Next minute it came howling, hot and mean, carrying a mouthful of grit. I cursed and pulled my hat down, scanning the sky. South of us, a wall of sand was rising, thick and red as blood. Sandstorm, I muttered, out of habit more than anything. She couldn't hear, but she felt it. I saw her flinch before the gust hit. Saw her hands spread flat against the wagon seat like she was listening through her bones. Then quicker than I'd seen anyone move, she tapped my arm, pointed off the road to a narrow break in the bluff, maybe half a mile off. You sure? I asked, but she'd already braced herself. Eyes on that slit of stone? I yanked the reins, trusting her for reasons I didn't stop to think about. The wagon bucked hard over uneven ground. My horse fought, but kept moving. The storm hit behind us, a living thing. Sand clawed at my back, filled my teeth, turned day to dusk. I hunched low, wrapping an arm around the girl to keep her from flying off the seat. She clung tight but didn't panic, just buried her face into my shoulder until we plunged into the shadow of rock. The canyon swallowed. The worst of it. We stumbled off the bench, coughing, eyes stinging. My horse trembled, but settled under my hand. She was already checking the wheels, the harness, like she'd done it 1,000 times. I found myself staring at her in the dim light. Her hair long and the color of old chestnuts whipped wild across her face, but her eyes were steady. She touched the earth palm flat, then tapped her own throat and ears. Shook her head slightly. Deaf. She was telling me again. In case I had hoped otherwise, I nodded slow. More to say I understood than to comfort her. She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in her face, then turned back to calm my horse with a touch to his muzzle. Damned animal quieted faster for her than he ever had for me. When the storm eased enough to breathe, we pushed out again. No words. Just the rattle of the wagon and the slow settling of my own heartbeat. By the time we reached the ranch, the sky was a bruised purple, streaked with the last of the sun. The place looked as it always did, lonely but alive. Fencing crooked in spots, roof patched with whatever I could afford. Home, such as it was. I helped her down. She hesitated, eyes sweeping the house, the barn, the corrals. I tried to see it through her gaze. Empty porch, one rocking chair, nothing soft but the sky. Maybe not much of a safe haven. You'll be all right here, I said quietly, though she couldn't hear. Habit again. She seemed to read me anyway. Gave a tiny nod, then looked toward the barn. You want? I started, unsure how to ask if she meant to sleep there. She walked that way. No fear, just choice. I let her that night. I sat alone at the table with stale bread and beans, staring at the empty chair across from me. Outside, I could hear the horses shifting and maybe something else. A hum, barely there, carried on the breeze through the cracked window. Sweet and low, almost like a lullaby. I froze. Silas said she was mute, but that was a sound. Fragile. Yes, but human and warm in a way the desert almost never is. I didn't sleep much. Morning broke, sharp and clear. When I stepped out, she was already in the corral, bare feet in the dust, moving slow around Shadowfire, the wild stallion I hadn't yet broken. She didn't touch him, just circled, watching. And he watched her back, ears forward, tail swishing. Then, damnedest thing I've seen, he walked to her. Just walked. lowered his head till she could stroke the velvet of his nose. She smiled, small, secret. Like dawn. Something inside me cracked a little right then. I don't know what future I bought for $55. I don't know if I just dragged trouble onto my land. But watching her with that horse, the sun turning her hair to fire, and the wildest beast I own melting under her hands, for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest stir of something I thought the war had burned clean out of me. Hope and fear too. Because hope's a dangerous thing out here, I pulled my hat low, swallowed hard, and walked toward the corral. One way or another, everything changed the moment I lifted my hand at that auction. And I had the feeling nothing about my quiet, careful life was going to stay quiet much longer. The seasons turned quiet and strange after the day I brought her home. Spring broke the hard crust of winter with silver rain and sudden green. And by the time the summer sun bled across the plains again, the ranch no longer sounded like just my boots and the creak of old boards. There was the whisper of bare feet in the yard at dawn, the soft breath of a girl humming to the horses, and something lighter in the air? Hope, maybe? Though I was slow to name it, Lila lived first in the barn, as she chose. I didn't press her. She fixed fence rails with deft fingers, sorted feed better than I ever had, and could coax a skittish colt to calm faster than whiskey calms a man. She taught herself our land with her eyes and her hands. She read the wind like a book. She never asked me for anything, and yet we built a language. A tap of her palm to her lips meant she was heading to the creek. My raised brow and a sweep of my hat meant stay close to the ranch. Little signs, unspoken and quick. Sometimes she'd catch me watching and smile. Small, but enough to make my chest ache in a way I'd forgotten I could feel. The first time she trusted me fully was the night. Shadow fire collect. I found her already kneeling beside him, moonlight painting her hair silver. She looked up wild-eyed, motioned for water, herbs. Together, we worked till dawn, me holding him steady, her murmuring low, not words, just sound. When he finally rose, trembling but alive, she leaned against me, too tired to fight it. That was the first time she let me hold her, just for a moment. And I knew right then, something inside both of us had shifted. But peace never sits long out here. The rumor started slow. A trader came by for hay and saw her touch a lame calf, saw it walk straight after. Another ranch hand swore she could hear the ground before a storm. Word trickled into Dust Haven and got twisted along the way. The deaf girl who talked to animals. The wild-eyed witch on my land. At first I ignored it. People talk. But whispers turned sharp. Once in town for salt and nails, I felt the weight of stares thicker than usual. Abigail Morse from the dry goods store wouldn't meet my eyes. A man I didn't know spat near my boots. And one night riding home, I found a crude bundle tied to my gate. Dried bones and a scrap of hide marked with a black X. I burned it. Said nothing to Lila. I should have known that silence wouldn't hold. One blistering afternoon, I came back from mending fence to find her in the yard, face pale, clutching a ragged piece of paper. Someone had ridden up while I was gone and left it, a note scrawled in jagged hand. Send the girl away or lose everything. No name, just threat. I saw her hand shake as she signed haltingly. My fault. No, I said, fierce enough to make her blink. Not your fault. My land, my fight. But that night I lay awake long after she curled up in the barn loft. The sound of her soft breathing reached through the walls. I felt an old, familiar heat, the one that used to come before battle, settle in my chest. Then came the first real strike. I woke to the smell of smoke. Not cook fires, sharp, acrid. I ran barefoot into the yard and saw the barn alight, flames clawing the sky. Horses screamed inside. I didn't think. I just moved. Lila was already there, pale but steady, throwing water with a cracked bucket. I grabbed a blanket, drenched it in the trough, and went in. The heat hit like a hammer. We cut ropes, slapped rumps, drove panicked animals into the night. Shadowfire nearly trampled me, but veered when Lila touched his flank. Whispering some broken tune, when the roof groaned and half collapsed. We stumbled out coughing and blind arms around each other without thinking. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold her. We lost feed and tools, but the animals lived. That was enough for now. Next morning, Miguel Flores rode in from town with 2 men and a wagon of lumber. "Heard you had trouble," he said, looking uneasy. "Some folks. They're spooked, Elias, but not all of us." Behind him came Dr. Whitaker, old and stiff, but eyes sharp. He checked our burns and left a jar of salve for Lila's raw hands. No questions asked. The help warmed something in me, but it didn't kill the worry. Silas Grant's name rode the wind again. A rancher swore he'd seen him near the river. Hiring drifters, I knew trouble was circling, and somewhere amid smoke and hammering new boards, something gentler bloomed too. Lila and I rebuilt the barn side by side. She worked silent and sure, hair falling in her eyes. One night I found her sitting in the half-finished doorway, moonlight silvering her face. I sat beside her, too tired to pretend distance. She looked at me, long and searching. Then trembling, but bold, she touched my cheek, fingers tracing the scar there like a map. I didn't breathe. She studied me, then gave the faintest smile, shy but real. I kissed her. It wasn't sweet at first, it was fire and dust and months of swallowed words. But then it gentled, turned into something I hadn't dared dream. She didn't flinch. Her hands found my shoulders and stayed there. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, eyes closed. In that silence, we said enough. We didn't talk about love, she couldn't say it. And I hadn't found the courage, but it lived in the way she slid her hand into mine when we walked the fence line. Or how she leaned against me after long days. It lived in the way my chest went light when she laughed. A quiet sound, but brighter than anything I'd known in years. But love doesn't scare off ghosts. Summer thickened, and with it came news. Silas was back. 2 ranchers were found beaten and their stock driven off. One whispered my name that Silas had asked after the witch girl I started. Carrying my colt everywhere, the next blow came from town. A council was called, not official law. Just ranchers and merchants gathering at the hall, stirred up by Abigail Morse's trembling speeches. Fear wrapped itself in God and neighborly duty fast out here. I rode in alone to face them. They didn't ask Lila to come, good thing, because the words were knives. Claimed she, cursed weather, ruined cattle, tempted men. One man swore his child fell sick after seeing her. Abigail's eyes glittered with grief. I remembered her boy had died last winter. Maybe she needed someone to blame. I said what I could. That she was just a girl. That she saved my horses. That the fire was no witchery, but plain malice. Some listened. Many didn't. That night, I found Lila waiting on the porch, hands tight, eyes knowing. She'd seen my face before I spoke. She signed, "We should leave." "No," I said. "It's our home." She touched her belly then, hesitant. My heart stutte. At first I didn't understand. Then I did. My voice broke. She nodded, eyes wide and afraid and shining. I sank to my knees before her, hands on her waist, my world shifting underfoot. Joy and terror and fierce protectiveness tangled inside me till I could hardly breathe. I pressed my forehead to her flat stomach and swore something I couldn't shape into. Words, we married soon after, quiet and hidden. Dr. Whitaker stood witness. Judge Red signed papers by lantern light. No rings, just a vow whispered rough between us and sealed with a trembling kiss. She wore a simple dress, hair loose. She smiled at me like sunrise breaking a long night. For a while, we lived in a fragile bubble. But Silas didn't forget. He came back with men, hard-eyed drifters, guns at their hips. They stormed into Dust Haven one hot dusk, claiming Lila called sickness onto their stock, that she'd hexed a rancher's boy. They dragged some poor beaten stranger forward, said he'd seen her call wolves. Lies slick as oil, the town gathered fast, fear making them bold. Torches, guns, voices rising. I felt the air go strange, heavy. I stepped out alone to the edge of that mob. My hand rested on my Colt but didn't draw, Not yet. I looked for allies and found Miguel standing off to the side, jaw tight. Dr. Whitaker, too, pale but steady. Abigail, trembling, torn. Then a sound split the dusk. Not human, not wind. Horses screaming, but not in panic, in rage. From barns, corrals, and open prairie, they came thundering. My stock, wild strays, even Shadowfire at their head. They moved like a tide, eyes white, manes flying. I didn't call them. Lila did. She stepped out from behind me, hair loose, belly just rounding under her dress, eyes alight like fire under water. She didn't speak. She couldn't, but she hummed low, a sound that seemed to run through the ground itself. The animals answered, hooves striking thunder. The mob faltered. Guns lowered. Men stumbled back. Silas cursed and tried to rally them, but the tide had turned. The stranger he'd dragged up, battered and terrified, found voice enough to spit truth. Silas had paid him to lie. And more than one man muttered that Silas had set fires, stolen stock. Under the weight of so many stares, Silas broke. He shouted denial, then fled when Shadowfire reared and screamed like hell itself. Silence followed. Broken only by breathing and horses blowing hard, Abigail stepped forward then, tears on her cheeks. She looked at Lila a long time, then at me. Enough, she said hoarsely. This ends. The torches went out one by one. That night, the sky opened and rain came, sudden and cleansing. I held Lila close on the porch, soaked and shaking, feeling the baby kick for the first time against my palm. She smiled through tears and touched my face. A quiet victory. Fragile but real. But the night wasn't done with us. Hours before dawn, Lila woke me with a sharp cry. Water on the floor, her face twisted with pain. Too soon, weeks too soon. Storms still rattled the sky. We had no midwife, no kin. Just me, terrified and clumsy. And her strong, but so small in that bed. She gripped my hands, eyes fierce. And somehow, through pain, signed what she needed. Towels, water, breathe. I followed. Half blind with fear, lightning split the sky as the baby came. Lila's humming filled the room, not song but something deeper, steadying us both. At last, a cry, strong, startling in the quiet. A girl, slick and tiny and alive. I wept. I don't remember letting go, but I wept. Head bowed to my wife and child. Lila was white with exhaustion, but smiling. Tears cutting clean tracks through soot on her cheeks. She touched the baby's cheek, then mine. Grace? We decided later. Grace Crowe. At dawn, the storm broke. Sun spilled across the soaked plain, turning everything gold and new. We stepped out together. Me, Lila wrapped in my coat, Grace bundled safe. The horses stood waiting, silent and calm, as if keeping vigil. By week's end, neighbors came. Miguel first, then others. Wood, tools, quiet apologies. Even Abigail, bearing blankets and a shy look. For the baby, she whispered. Months later, a letter arrived on thick paper with the Texas seal. Governor himself, or his hand anyway. Word of Lila's gift had traveled. They wanted to build a place nearby, a school, a refuge for folks like her and our daughter, safe from fear. A place to learn, to heal. I read it aloud to her slowly, though she couldn't hear the words. She watched my lips and smiled soft. I saw hope bloom there, not just for us, but for something larger. I never thought my life would hold any of this. Not after war, not after loss. But there we stood. A scarred man, a once-sold girl, and a baby with a wild cry that sounded like a promise. The West is hard, cruel sometimes. But it gives too, if you dare take hold, and I reckon I've finally learned how.